Oh, Jesus, boys, girls, in betweeners. We are back with Mortal Kombat 11, and my god, is it, like, just a fucking mess in the story right now.
What are you doing? Just waving your hands around?
Sand massage.
Okay, they do some fairly interesting stuff with the timeline stuff in the storyline. Wow, that was an elegant way to put it. The timeline mechanics and what it does and what it means for the Mortal Kombat mythos. But as much as I like the concept and as much as I like Chronica, I have now finished Mortal Kombat 11's story, and I'm not sure what to feel about the way it ended.
It's weird because, to me, and obviously these are huge spoilers, but you guys are used to that by now, they have this very cool time mechanic where they bring back all these people from the dead, and there's interactions between Sonya and her daughter and things like that, all this kind of business, and it never goes anywhere. It doesn't actually really affect the plot.
Well, by the plot's nature, it kind of erases everything that had been established up to this point. So I think this entire storyline is a setup for another story reboot.
Yeah, it's only been 3 games, but sure, let's do another reboot.
Well, I mean,
why do we even have stories in fighting games?
The iconic thing about fighting game storylines is often the tournament. But unfortunately, unlike, say, Street Fighter or Tekken or Dead or Alive, you can't really repeat the tournament much in the Mortal Kombat storyline. There's a reason why from Mortal Kombat 4 onward, the storylines in Mortal Kombat games tended to be like characters who fought in the tournament get recruited to save the world from something in a non-tournament storyline. But
yeah, which is fine. But yeah, like it's just, it seems like a bit of a wasted opportunity to me.
It feels like there's directions that this timeline could go with a story, but they also want to go back to the point where like the previous generation's characters were still around. So
yeah. Well, this is a good example, right? We got Jackson and we got Jackie, and you know, at this point in the timeline, older Jackson's gone off the rails. He's working for the bad guys, things like that, and she's bonding with the younger version of him, which is fine. But again, it doesn't really lead to anything. It's just kind of like, oh, this is a neat moment. Let's enjoy this and move on. There's
another thing, though. The story, both in arcade mode and in story mode, makes kind of a big deal about the fact that if Jax hadn't spent time as a Revenant and been traumatized by that, he wouldn't have met Jackie's mother, and as a result, she wouldn't have been born. And that's pretty much what happens in her arcade ending. She changes time so that her dad doesn't go through all that stuff and accepts that she's not going to exist. And she doesn't. She fades away.
Wow. Okay.
That's her arcade ending. She changes time so that her dad has a better life, and she fades out of the timeline as a result. But I think that means this is going to be the last game we have Jackie Briggs in, and that's unfortunate because I like her as a character in this game more than in the previous one, to be honest. So
I don't know about that.
I think we need to get to the point where we need to stop focusing on having every character be in the story.
Yeah,
mode, quote unquote, or change it to where we go back.
Everyone is here.
We go back to just the arcade settings where every character has their own kind of mini story.
Well, yeah.
Because these long, big story sequences is just gonna fuck with the gameplay at some point.
Well, I don't mind having a story mode, exactly. But I agree with you in that we don't necessarily need to have every character in the game be involved in the story. And that's kind of the thing. When Tekken did a story about the next generation of characters, it dropped half the characters who used to exist and did a story about the new generation of characters. Street Fighter 3 did pretty much the same thing. And that never really goes over well. Mortal Kombat 10 did this thing where it sort of did that, but just kept a lot of the older characters around in their older versions so that it could sort of have its cake and eat it too. And it also compromised by having a lot of them be zombies and just have like non-zombie skins of them for use in non-story gameplay, which is a way to do it, you know. Mortal.
I guess the interesting question as well is that, like, as Game Back to what Name Member said before, like, why do we have story and fighting games? Do we need, like, these really super complicated stories and fighting games? Because a lot of older ones didn't have these kind of, like, really grandiose, very cinematic story modes.
That's true. They tended to have a plot to hold it together, to give you a goal, I suppose, some context to the progression of fights and the final boss at the end of arcade mode, which was nice to have. It gave you some kind of idea of what you were accomplishing by taking this guy out. And that's... I enjoy at least having that minimum amount of story. It was like... Fighting games have been scrambling to catch up with the rest of the gaming industry in terms of having involved story and lore. And there are, to be fair, a lot of fighting game fans who appreciate that lore to a surprising extent. I don't think you'll necessarily get anyone who's quite as diehard into correcting people about stuff they get wrong as, say, in like the Star Trek fan base, but some people do appreciate that, and I don't necessarily think it should go away. But I think there are some games, like maybe this one, that take it a little too far.
Yeah, fair enough.
And it all kind of
fucking punch.
It all kind of feels like this story in the end is nothing but a really convoluted excuse to get back to the series status quo.
They're starting to become comic books.
Yeah,
they're too long. They're too complicated. There's too many characters.
And then they just reboot themselves every 10 years.
Yeah, so it's like either cut it out, or just understand that not every character is going to be involved in story modes. It's fine that they're there for matches and gameplay and stuff, but you need to stop. You need to just narrow the scope on these things.
In retrospect, Mortal Kombat 9 and 10 kind of feel like the new 52, and this feels like Rebirth. But yeah. But I fully expect Mortal Kombat 12 will be another rendition of the Mortal Kombat tournament with Shao Kahn as the final boss, or maybe we'll get really retro and it'll be Shang Tsung again.
Yeah, I suppose what's interesting is that, like, you look at Street Fighter V as the counterpoint to this. The Street Fighter V launched very, very bare bones. It launched without a story mode, which was one thing that really got criticized for a lot. Like, it took a lot of heat for the fact that it was so stripped down.
It's not so much a story mode; it didn't have arcade mode either.
Yeah, that was the thing
That's
that
true.
most people
Okay,
mentioned. The story mode is pretty bad. I don't even care about it, but the arcade mode not being there at launch was pretty much unforgivable.
Yeah, fine, okay. But the point that I was getting to was that, like, so 6 months later, it did launch its story mode, which as DLC, and I don't think anyone really cared about it that much.
Nah, no one really did. But one thing people definitely cared about was not having an arcade mode, but having a survival mode, which was your only single player content, and that was tedious to go through.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It was tedious to go through with no other options in between, I should say. One of the things that I think makes a good modern fighting game is a nice variety of single-player content. And one of the things that I think is important for that is an arcade mode, because it's one of the shortest and sweetest things you can do in a fighting game. You can just fight through 8 or so fights and then go play online. Arcade mode is my usual warm-up when I boot up a fighting game. I play one round of arcade mode, and then I go into online fights. But a survival mode doesn't really have that benefit, because, it only ends when you lose.
I just do casual matches when I'm warming up for a fighting game, then go to ranked, but that's me. But yeah, I see what your point is, and I agree with it wholeheartedly. I think what was interesting about this game is that, and again, probably this is going back to Street Fighter V being like the warning that everyone needs to take from the industry that we can't have a game which is too bare bones. This game almost goes too far in trying to provide depth and value outside of the online mode, in the sense, like, with the crypt and the Towers of Time and whatnot, and how they all interact with each other, and how you have to do the Towers of Time to be able to get items to the crypt, to be able to go through the crypt, to be able to get items to your character, and so on and so forth.
Not saying that fighting games don't need single-player content. I'm saying that I don't think story mode is inherently the way to do it anymore.
I don't know. I think NetherRealm Studios is good at making good story modes for their fighters. It's more the game as a whole leans a little too heavily onto the story mode to provide its basis, I suppose. I mean, fighting games, in my experience, start to feel more limited when their character roster always needs to have story justification. Soul Calibur 5.
Well, yeah, that's more what I'm getting at. You don't need the story mode to be the reason to play the game. It could be nice. It could be nice as a thing, but we need to stop making it kind of like the single-player element to focus on. I think
it's less about
to justify everything.
Yeah, it's less about justifying is the aspect I'm worried about. Like, a lot of my favorite fighting games are only my favorite fighting games after they reach the point where the developer stopped giving a fuck about who was in the story and piled on just a million DLC characters throughout different editions. Like Dead or Alive 5 has Ein in its roster, who is like the version of Hayate from one of the older games, who was amnesiac and was fighting with karate instead of his ninja stuff. And he's just there, sitting in the roster for no goddamn reason, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah, Tengu's in there, and he was the boss from Dead or Alive too.
Yeah, and
I mean, to use another example, like Teen Gohan's in Fighter Z, and he's not in the story mode, obviously. So
I don't really think the Dragon Ball Z fighting games are games I would list as.
I'm just using it as an example where we need to. You don't need to worry about this as much as people like to think.
Yeah,
they do.
I suppose.
Yeah.
I guess I was just about to say that I don't think DBZ games are an example of games with story.
Well, I'm specifically referring to Fighter Z, not so much, Budokai, where it's just doing the anime again.
I suppose
because it's perfectly fine to have Hit in the roster or Teen Gohan, but not have them show up in the story mode. You don't need them there.
Yeah, fair enough.
That's a valid point. Yeah, and again, like Dragon Ball FighterZ was a good example of a game which was trying to go out of its way to provide content, but in the case of like this game, it does a very good job of providing content that's not story-based, whereas in Fighters, it was a terrible example of that because it was just a story mode you had to do 3 times and it was way too fucking long.
And just one of those modes was like 5 times longer than it needed to be.
Yeah.
I will say that up to a point, I do really like the story, though. It's just the direction it goes toward the end that threw it off for me.
Also, for people who haven't watched the Fighter Z playthrough, I'm also in that as well, so you might want to go check that out. Just a little tip there. Just go check that out.
Where did you get the cigar, Jax?
I'm more interested in the fact that they not once they actually ever do like an anti kind of smoking sort of thing. It's like he's just smoking a cigar and looking badass. No big deal.
Yeah, it was the 90s,
Yeah, I was waiting for Jackie to be like, "Ew, Dad, really?"
I recognize that. That's from Batman Forever.
And here's Dr. Claw.
Noob Saibot, you will never stop being too edgy for this world.
Too edgy is barely edgy enough.
I like some of the character dialogue other characters have for Noob because like a lot of them just make fun of him because of how edgy he is.
Nice. Yeah, this game is very self-aware, which is always nice. The problem with Noob Saibot for me is that like he is actually he looks like a fun character to play, and when I saw the trailer for him initially, I was like, this is a character I might want to check out. And then I realized that everyone plays Noob Saibot.
He's using the Shadow Clone Jutsu, by the way. I just thought I'd point that out.
Yeah, nice.
I wonder if the developers did that on purpose.
In reality, I am another ninja skin.
These were all the color variations of ninjas that you won't be able to get in the game.
People point to Scorpion and Sub-Zero whenever someone brings up the ninjas don't wear orange argument, and we're looking at a version of Sub-Zero using the Shadow Clone Jutsu, so it's all come full circle. This is
Yeah,
this is a case where like the character you pick is the one who breaks out. I don't really know why your decision makes that character strong enough to break out while the other one's still struggling, but okay.
Yeah, it's like the daughter breaks out, then like the guy who's like twice as strong as her, like this big dude's just like, okay, yeah, you handle this, you good.
The previous two character chapter, Sub-Zero and Scorpion, I just wound up playing a Sub-Zero a lot because I prefer him. And in this one, I actually switched between Jackie and Jax. But you know, I guess the game devs predicted people would do that because they went and gave Scorpion his own chapter later on anyway.
Yeah, they did too, and so it's not a bad one. I do. It's kind of interesting, I guess, because like he doesn't get to be his younger self, but his younger self is also a dick. So there's some good direction there.
I like how his shadow pulls him back up when he loses a round.
Oh yeah, this game is just so full of like just nice little touches. You would be here all day if you're trying to list all of them.
Oh, so you're saying it gets that Smash Brothers Direct thing where he just lists the differences for no reason.
So, in between parts, I exposed myself to Mortal Kombat 4 for the first time. Jesus Christ, this series had one hell of a dark period.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think I've actually ever played that.
They motion captured all the animations and then sped them up so that it would feel like a Mortal Kombat game. So the game has this definite jank feeling to it.
Nice. Yeah, I don't think I've ever played that. I played 1, 2, 3, and then I think I might skip to like 6 or 7 after that. I think I had a dead zone in the middle there.
Didn't play Armageddon.
No, I don't think I did. I played shit, the one where there's like the betrayal by like the Elder God dude, which had a really good story mode in that one as well. I think it's like the first one, but anyway.